Part 3, Giving and Receiving Inspiration. Chapter 10, Absorbing the Inspiration of Others. Quote, "A man may have never entered a church or a mosque, nor performed any ceremony, but if he realizes God within himself and is thereby lifted above the vanities of the world, that man is a holy man, a saint, call him what you will." Unquote. That's from Vivekananda, a great Indian saint. What inspirational people are not? It's possible for someone to achieve at a high level, earn many accolades, be widely admired and respected, but not be living from spirit. Inspirational people aren't necessarily highly motivated in society's sense of the word. After all, such individuals may just be chasing after more symbols of success, satisfying their desire to dominate and control others by acquiring as much power as possible. People who have motivated us are not necessarily inspirational. We may have been motivated by those who threatened or beat us or cursed and called us a fool and a wimp for not doing what they thought we should be doing. Clearly, inspiration wasn't part of their motivation. We also can't assume that all teachers are living their ultimate calling. A good instructor might be very knowledgeable about a given subject and extremely effective at conveying that knowledge to students. But he or she might also be very disconnected from God realization. Teachers often have such low self-esteem that they lose themselves completely in devotion to something that's far removed from their true calling, especially when great teaching skills can fill a void and seem to be a substitute for that calling. Of course, I'm not saying that all teachers are lacking in God realization, but be wary of assuming that a gifted instructor is automatically living in spirit. A person may have the highest intellectual credentials available and still be detached from his or her spirit. The ability to cite historical sources, speak with distinction, and earn advanced degrees doesn't automatically mean that someone is capable of inspiring others. Once again, it doesn't disqualify that individual either. The smartest people may turn us off with their pomposity and bragging, or they may be so cerebral that it's difficult to know what they're talking about. Be on the lookout for mistaking intellectualization for inspiration. The journey to our ultimate calling isn't a scholastic endeavor. There are no written exams, no grades to earn, no report cards, and no advanced degrees. It's important to understand that any of the traditional measures of success, such as job promotions, wealth, public acclaim, stylishly expensive clothing, a commanding presence, verbal adeptness, a voluminous vocabulary, a charismatic appearance, fame, and so forth, don't necessarily mean high marks as an inspirational person. In fact, some people who rate very high marks on the ego-based indices of success are the ones I find most difficult to be around and totally uninspiring. While fame, in all of its forms, seems highly desirable and is focused upon by endless television shows discussing the personal lives of those who are in the news, particularly show business, this does not measure the ability to inspire in the slightest. When one of my daughters once told me that her goal was to become famous, I urged her to shift her sights to living and acting in rapport with her passion and then letting the fame thing take care of itself. I've met many celebrities in all fields of endeavor, and I can assure you that public notoriety is not in any way an indicator of a person's connection to spirit. And if I happen to be famous personally, it's not because I chose it or even earned it. Fame is located outside of me. It's in the opinions that others have of me. It's my choice to be inspired, however, and that always involves being independent of the opinions of others. Inspirational people aren't interested in winning a popularity contest, especially when those who seek praise and recognition often do so to soothe the feelings of insecurity. In general, people who doubt their divinity fear being criticized because they see themselves as fraudulent beings. Consequently, they take on the full-time job of trying to be liked by everyone they meet. Despite their obvious popularity, they'd be disastrous in the inspiration department. I need to add a disclaimer here. I don't in any way want to imply that a person who has gained great popularity and notoriety is thereby disqualified from being a source of inspiration. Quite the contrary. Many of the most inspiring people I've come across in my life have achieved worldwide acclaim. I simply urge you not to equate inspiration with recognition. What inspirational people are. When we meet others who we think might be living in spirit, we must ask the following questions. Do they seem to have a rapturous heart, sending out signals that they love the world and everyone in it? Are they jubilant about the work they do? Do they see the world as a friendly place? Are they at peace with themselves? Do they appear to be kind rather than judgmental? Are they confident without being boorish? Do they tend to be cheerful? Do they love to play? Are they elated to be in the company of young children as well as older people? Do they listen rather than lecture? Are they willing to be students as well as teachers? Do they love nature? Are they in awe of the world? Do they express rational humility? Are they approachable? Do they take great pleasure in serving others? Do they seem to have tamed their own egos? Do they accept all people as equals? Are they open to new ideas? The answers to these questions will help us ascertain whether another person is potentially an inspiring influence in our life. Those who have the gift of inspiration exude something that's difficult to pin down intellectually, yet is undeniably recognizable in how we feel in their presence. We can sense that they're aligned with the source energy from which we all originate. We perceive a place within them that resonates deeply within ourselves, a vibrational recognition of inspiration. And they have much to offer us. We recognize their high spiritual energy, which longs to be active in our life. When we feel this resonance, it's reflected in a feeling that's similar to a warm, soothing shower that's running deep within us. When I'm in the presence of an inspiring person, the first thing I notice is this warm shower overtaking me. It's like a wave of energy that slowly moves down my shoulders and spine, and I know something is happening energetically. Even though I can't see, touch, smell, or hear it, I know that I'm experiencing a shift that makes me feel incredibly good, or as I like to think of it, incredibly God. My own personal experiences with inspiring people. In this section, I'd like to further illustrate what inspirational people are by noting some individuals who have particularly impacted my life with their high energy. I vividly recall the days of the Cuban Missile Crisis more than 40 years ago. I'd recently been discharged from active duty in the Navy after 4 years and was attending Wayne State University in Detroit. If the U.S. had been drawn into a war with the USSR, I would have been at the top of the list to be called back to active duty because I had a top-secret job classification. But more than my concern about my own status was what had us collectively biting our fingernails globally. That is, the thought of the consequences of an exchange of nuclear weapons, which would put all of civilization at risk. President Kennedy was a source of inspiration to me, but not because of his political views or any of his presidential actions. Rather, I embraced him as a man who conveyed love, peace, and joy in his demeanor and showed respect for all people by vowing to end segregation in America. As Robert McNamara, Kennedy's Secretary of Defense, once observed, if JFK had lived, there would have been no Vietnam War. That's because he believed that war should be an absolute last resort and that his primary job as president was to maintain the peace. I found JFK inspiring back in the early 60s, and I continue to be profoundly touched by his spirit throughout my lifetime. He inspired me. In 1978, I was invited to go to Vienna to participate in a presentation to a group of young presidents of companies. I was assigned to be on a panel with a man who had been a huge source of inspiration to me, Viktor Frankel. Frankel was a medical doctor who had been herded off to die in a Nazi concentration camp in World War II. While imprisoned, he kept notes that ultimately became a book called Man's Search for Meaning. This work, which touched me deeply many years later, illustrated not only how Dr. Frankel survived the horrors of Auschwitz, but also how he helped other campmates to do the same. For example, he taught his fellow human beings how to find meaning and even joy in a fish head floating in the dirty water that masqueraded as soup. He taught them to be with his spirit and infuse it in others who were giving up on life. He even practiced sending love and peace to his captors and refused to feel hatred and vengeance because he knew that it was foreign to his spirit, which he wouldn't forsake. So, 33 years after his liberation, I was about to address hundreds of corporate presidents who were all under the age of 50, as was I at the time. I had read Man's Search for Meaning as a young doctoral student and practiced Frankel's logotherapy, which taught therapists in training to help clients find meaning in their existence regardless of their circumstances. Viktor Frankel had been one of the truly inspirational figures in my life, and being on the same panel under the pretext of being a colleague of this master teacher was overwhelming to me. And an afternoon I've never forgotten followed, full of pure exhilaration and inspiration. Viktor Frankel stayed true to his spiritual origins in the face of horrors that destroyed so many. When I met him, he exuded joy, peace, kindness, and love, and he wasn't bitter. Instead, he felt that his experience taught him lessons he'd never have known otherwise. I spent a good part of that afternoon in Vienna in 1978, listening and being in awe, and now, years later, I'm still greatly impacted by the presence of this man in my life. Yes, indeed, Viktor Frankl inspired me. In 1994, 24-year-old college student Immaculée Ilibagiza came home to be with her family in Rwanda for the Easter holidays, and inadvertently found herself in the middle of one of the worst genocides in history. As a member of the Tutsi tribe, Immaculée was forced to hide in a tiny bathroom, which was configured in such a way that it appeared to be inaccessible from the house, with 7 other women for a total of 3 terrifying months. As she told me, by the grace of God, we were never found. How that happened, I do not know. All we could hear was the smoke of hatred coming from the men right outside the door. After living in this terror for 90 days, trembling in fear every day, knowing that they would be hacked to death if they were discovered, the women were finally released from their entombment into the protection of French soldiers. As Immaculée related, when we were finally safe, I learned how most of my family had died. My father was shot by soldiers, my mother was killed by machete, and my younger brother was murdered in a stadium while searching for food. My big brother was executed after questioning. They said they wanted to see the brain of a person who had a master's degree, so they cut him to pieces. I met this incredible woman in New York after she was granted an asylum visa as a victim of this organized attempt at ethnic cleansing by a band of thugs. Just about 1 million men, women, and children were systematically slaughtered with machetes or blunt instruments, and the U.S. didn't intervene, something that former President Clinton publicly acknowledged was the greatest failure of his own administration. Immaculée isn't bitter or filled with rage. She merely wants to be sure that such a tragedy never occurs again. She has love in her heart, and she's committed to telling her story, which is published by Hay House. I was privileged to write the foreword for this amazing book, which is titled Left to Tell, Discovering God Amidst the Rwandan Holocaust. Truly one of the most inspiring books I've ever read in my life. I'm honored to join this divinely inspiring woman by going to Rwanda and helping set up a program to educate and provide for the vast number of orphans who are left behind by this genocide. And yes, being in Immaculée's life in the small way that I am inspires me beyond anything that I can convey here to you in words. In 1999, I was invited to South Africa to lecture to some public audiences. While in Cape Town, I took the ferry over to Robben Island to visit the prison where Nelson Mandela had been incarcerated for so many years. I actually visited at the time of the 10th anniversary celebration of his release. Here was a man who spent more than 27 years of his life imprisoned. He wasn't even allowed visitors because he was a vocal opponent of a system of apartheid in which an entire race of people were declared by law to be inferior and unworthy of the same privileges as the remaining citizens of the country. And he worked all day in a limestone quarry, where the burning sunlight glared so against the white rock that his eyes became mere slits due to the squinting that he was forced to practice in order to survive. I personally spent 30 minutes in that quarry, and my eyes stung all day. Imagine what years of such exposure would wreak. Mandela went deep within himself, and when he was finally released, he came out with forgiveness and reconciliation in his heart. His staying in spirit was the force behind the dismantling of apartheid and his ultimate election to the presidency of an emerging democracy of South Africa a few years later. As I meditated in the prison outside of this great man's cell, I felt the warm inner shower I described earlier in this chapter. Then I was handed an autographed copy of his book, Long Walk to Freedom, which I treasure. Nelson Mandela conveyed the spiritual energy of love, peace, kindness, and tolerance during all of his travails, and this spiritual energy provided a blueprint that changed the face of Africa and the world forever. Yes, Mandela inspired me. Closer to home, I was inspired by Mrs. Olive Fletcher. In 1956, I was taking biology for the second time at Denby High School in Detroit. I'd failed the class the previous year because of my own stubbornness. I'd refused to complete a leaf collection, which my then 15-year-old self perceived to be an absurd requirement. At that time, my mother was divorcing my alcoholic stepfather, and I was working in a local grocery store every evening during the week and all day on Saturday and Sunday. My instructor for this second foray into biology was Mrs. Fletcher, and she was the very first teacher I encountered who seemed to care about me personally. For example, she talked with me after school, called my home to see if I was okay during the tumultuousness, including frequent fights and other unpleasantness, taking place at the time, and allowed me to put my head down and sleep during study periods when I'd completed my assignments. She also encouraged me to tutor other students because she recognized something in me that I'd never heard a teacher say before. She told me that I was brilliant and had a mind that could take me wherever I wanted to go. Thanks to Mrs. Fletcher's inspiration, I went from a failing grade the previous year to an A. I wanted to excel just for her because she had so much faith in me. Now, exactly a half a century later, Mrs. Olive Fletcher still stands out as the one individual in all of my school years who turned the direction of my life from fighting the system to being able to choose to fit in without having to give in. Yes, she inspired me. I could write many more short descriptions of those who provided me with life-altering inspiration, but I'd be remiss if I were to omit the one person among all of those I've known who has been my greatest source of it. Back in 1942, when I was 2 years old, my mother was left to take on the responsibility for raising my two brothers, ages 3 and 5, and me alone. My father, of whom I have absolutely no recollection, literally walked out on his family and never once placed a phone call to see how we were doing. He paid no child support, since he spent a great deal of time in trouble with the law, including some jail time for being a thief. He simply walked away and never looked back. After I was born, my mother brought me home to their tiny apartment on the east side of Detroit and discovered that my father had left my 16-month-old brother Dave in the care of my 4-year-old brother Jim and had temporarily moved in with a woman in Ann Arbor, some 40 miles away. Try to imagine the scene. It's 1940. A depression has left almost everyone economically bankrupt. There are no government programs to aid the support of 3 children under the age of 4. An alcoholic husband refuses to work, steals money from everyone, and regularly chooses the company of other women, leaving his wife to care for their 3 babies. An anemic infant needs medical assistance, which is largely unavailable to anyone living in poverty. Yet out of this seemingly hopeless scenario emerged a woman who had a dream that her life could and would get better. After finally going through the divorce, my mother was totally on her own. She worked first as a candy girl at a 5 and dime store and then as a secretary for the Chrysler Corporation, and her earnings came to approximately $17 per week. She was forced to place Dave and me in a series of foster homes supported by the Methodist Church while Jim moved in with her parents. Her nightmare was realized. Her family had been split up, and the thought of this being a permanent condition was too devastating for her to contemplate. But she held a vision for herself that she never, ever abandoned. Somehow, someday, I will unite my family and raise my boys under one roof. Unfortunately, times were challenging and the years passed. Mother visited Dave and me whenever possible. She didn't have an automobile or even a driver's license, and the distance to Mount Clemens, where we resided, was approximately 17 miles, but it might as well have been 7,000 miles since there was no transportation or money to pay for her to get there. But my mother was determined. She even married a man she didn't love as a way to unite her family. In 1949, our family moved into a tiny, and I mean tiny, duplex on the east side of Detroit. Like our father, our new stepfather was also an alcoholic and irresponsible provider. Drinking became his escape, and frequent, hostile interchanges were the norm. But my mother, who refused to see her boys separated again, continued to work, and work. Every morning she was up at 5 a.m., making breakfast and packing lunches for her 3 growing boys. She took 3 buses to work and 3 home every day, standing outside on those endless freezing winter mornings and returning home at 5:45 p.m. in order to prepare an evening meal. My brothers and I all had paper routes or were stock boys, but the hard work fell on the shoulders of this never-complaining, always cheerful woman. Every weekend looked like this from my mother, washing endless loads of clothes and hanging them up on the line to dry, making breakfast, lunch, and dinner, ironing down in the basement on Sundays. The work never ended, and yet this woman was the most joyful, loving, beautiful soul to be around. All my brothers and my friends came to our house to hang out because of my mother. They loved her, and more than that, they loved being in our home because of the energy she brought to it. This woman lived from spirit and offered all of us inspiration. Not one of us would ever have even considered talking back or even being disrespectful in any way. She commanded our respect, but she never demanded it. And with all of the responsibilities she had, my mother never left the house with her hair in curlers or her clothes in disarray. She took great pride in herself, and through her example, she taught my brothers and myself to do the same. While going through a second divorce from a now out-of-control alcoholic, she never abandoned her role as a mother to all of us. In later years, when her own mother was quite sick, I watched in astonished admiration as she took on the sole responsibility for caring for her mom, despite the fact that she had 4 siblings. And then, wonder of wonders, as my ex-stepfather reached a stage where his alcohol and smoking addictions were taking their final toll, I watched in amazement as she cared for this man who had largely mistreated her throughout their marriage. She went to his home, did his laundry, called for medical help, visited him in the hospital, and extended love where she had received only mistreatment and even abuse. Today, my mother approaches the age of 90 and still bowls twice a week, lives on her own, and never complains. To this day, she won't leave home unless she's dressed to her high standards of appropriateness and her hair is beautifully coiffed. She respects herself, and this esteem has trickled down to me, her youngest son, and my 2 brothers as well. Now she has 3 boys who are all eligible for Social Security and Medicare, yet still she lives and breathes that loving spirit. Yes, Mother, you inspire me, and I've dedicated this book to you and to Immaculate. Ramakrishna, a great saint who lived in India and inspired millions of others from his God-realized perspective, once offered this observation. Saints, he said, are like big steamships, which not only cross the ocean themselves, but carry many passengers to the other shore. May you too be like those big steamships. But if you're not, then by all means allow yourself to be one of those lucky passengers. Get on board by going on to the next chapter. Chapter 11, Being an Inspiration for Others. Quote, "We are all teachers, and what we teach is what we learn. And so we teach it over and over again until we learn." Unquote. That's from A Course in Miracles. And also, quote, "The real purpose of teachers, books, and teachings is to lead us back to the kingdom of God within ourselves." Joel Goldsmith. Just as we're all students throughout life, we're all teachers. In fact, we learn best by offering what we desire for ourselves to as many individuals as we can, as frequently as we can. And that's one reason I wrote this book and I'm putting together this program. If I instruct enough people for a long enough period of time, I'll teach what I most want to learn, which is how to live in spirit. Following this line of thinking, it's imperative that we make a deliberate effort to increase our inspirational energy, as this will lead us to being both a spiritual learner and teacher simultaneously. Spiritual teachers have raised the vibrational frequency of their daily life to a point where they're able to provide inspiration to others merely by their presence, and this is the standard to which we need to aspire. It isn't necessarily a scholarly undertaking. There are no lesson plans or report cards for this kind of teaching I'm writing about in these pages and that I'm speaking about here in this program. Rather, I'm talking about the things we can do each and every day to inspire our fellow humans, which is what this chapter is all about. Kindness inspires others. Recently, 3 of my kids and I were seated at the food court of a mall here on Maui. As we were talking and enjoying our meals, a young boy stumbled and the tray full of hamburgers and French fries he'd just purchased from McDonald's went flying all over the floor. His parents immediately came to his rescue, and the manager of the restaurant good-naturedly replaced all of the food at no cost. The boy was embarrassed, but it all worked out fine, except that people were having to dodge what he'd dropped as they lined up for their purchases. Neither the boy's family nor the people working at the restaurant took any initiative to clean up this mess, which was actually a hazard to the crowd at the food court. I watched for a few moments, and then I took an empty tray and proceeded to pick up all of the food and dispose of it in the trash container. I returned to my seat, saying nothing about the incident. About 10 minutes later, a woman who'd observed this scene, without my noticing, came over to our table. To my teenage daughters, she said, "You girls have just been given a lesson by your father. He has shown you by his actions what it means to be a caring, helpful citizen. No one else in this entire place thought of doing anything about that mess on the floor, but he did. He inspired me, and I hope that you were inspired by his actions too." Unquote. She left, and my girls sort of smiled knowingly, since this is rather a normal thing for them to see. The point of this story is to illustrate that one simple act of kindness and service that's in alignment with our source will do more to inspire others than lectures on the virtues of being a thoughtful citizen ever could. All I wanted to do was to eliminate the potential peril of greasy burgers and fries on the floor. I wasn't trying to inspire anyone, and that's the crux of this chapter. When we elevate our consciousness above the level of ego, which says, "I didn't spill that food, so it's not my job to clean it up," to the level that asks, "How may I serve?" we become an inadvertent source of inspiration to anyone who's in the energy field of our spiritually based actions. We can also be on the lookout for opportunities to be a source of inspiration. For example, when I board an airplane, I tend to look for the chance to extend some sort of service to strangers. I put the word strangers in quotations in the book to emphasize there aren't actually any strangers anywhere in the universe. Helping vertically challenged passengers place their carry-on luggage in the overhead compartment is perfect because others noticing this kind of kindness may be inspired while at the same time I'm heeding my own calling to be both inspired and inspiring. Gratitude inspires others. Without exception, I begin every day of my life with an expression of gratitude. As I look in the mirror to begin my daily ritual of shaving, I say, "Thank you, God, for life, for my body, for my family and loved ones, for this day, and for the opportunity to be of service. Thank you, thank you, thank you." If we practice gratitude as opposed to maintaining an attitude of entitlement, we'll automatically extend inspiration wherever we go. Being grateful helps remove the influence of our ego, which is certain that we're better than everybody else. An attitude of gratitude allows us to adopt what's called radical humility, a trait that's very persuasive in helping others feel inspired. Most of the people I've met or observed who are at the top levels in their chosen fields have these attitudes of gratitude and radical humility. After all, when so many high achievers reach for their statuette or championship trophy, they often say, "First, I'd like to thank God." It's almost as if they can't help themselves. They're so grateful for their accolade, but even more than that, they know that there's a force in the universe way bigger than they are that allows them to act or sing or write or compete or design. And if we adopt this kind of an attitude, we'll inspire others. It's that simple. Generosity inspires others. It doesn't matter if we call it God, Krishna, Atman, Allah, the universal mind, Ra, Yahweh, or even Anna or Fred. I think we'd all agree that the all-creating source of everything is the most generous being there is. Along with life itself, it offers us unending abundance in the form of air, water, lungs, heart, kidney, liver, and all we need to sustain life. On just this one tiny planet hurtling through space, whatever name we want to call it, it provides the ability to feed all of us and dispose of all of our waste, which then gets used to fertilize new life and then repeats the process over and over and over again. And remember, this is only one planet in an endless universe of heavenly bodies. Talk about benevolence. Generosity is obviously one of the ways to be more godlike. I know that I'm inspired when I see evidence of it on the part of others. Very often it's manifested during or following times of crisis, almost as if God gets our attention and reminds us to be more like Him when we face devastating circumstances. A tsunami diverts our aircraft carriers away from killing each other and into a zone where food and shelter are offered. An earthquake motivates us to risk our own lives to save strangers who days before were called enemies. And hurricanes bring out the best in us. Such so-called disasters lead us to the inherent godlike generosity that's latent within all of us. However, we don't need a crisis to remind ourselves to give. We only need to be in spirit to be reminded of the joy of donating our energy, time, and possessions to others. Listening inspires others. As ironic as it may sound, we're far more inspiring to others when we're willing to listen than when we're giving them advice. That's because conveying to others that we value what they have to say is a way of demonstrating that we care. It's a way of being inspiring, a way of listening like God. People who find it difficult to listen to another person without bringing the conversation back to themselves are convinced by their ego of their self-importance. And as you're well aware by now, that ego is an illusion that's convinced us to pay attention to a false self. There's no higher compliment than to be told we're a good listener. Everyone loves a good listener, largely because it makes them feel loved, cared for, and worthy of being heard. When we leave any encounter where we feel we've been heard, even if we know the listener strongly disagreed with us, we're still inspired. Why? Because for a few moments the listener has emulated what it feels like when we pray. In deep prayer, we're not looking for the resolution of conflict or answers falling from the sky. We just want to feel as if we're in contact with someone who cares enough to hear us out. This brings to mind something Mahatma Gandhi, one of the truly inspirational beings of our time, once said: "Silence of the sewn-up lips is no silence. One may achieve the same result by chopping off one's tongue, but that would not be silence. He is truly silent who, having the capacity to speak, utters no idle word." In addition, these words from Ralph Waldo Emerson have always reminded me to be a listener. "I like the silent church before the service begins better than the preaching," he said. This is great advice if we wish to be a source of inspiration. Being at peace inspires others. Being at peace with ourselves is a way of going through life eschewing conflict and confrontation. When we're in a state of tranquility, we actually send out a vibration of energy that impacts all living creatures, including plants, animals, and all people, even babies. And of course, the reverse applies as well. Belligerent individuals who live in turmoil and revel in hostile encounters send out nonverbal energy that adversely impacts those around them. The immediate impulse is to remove ourselves from these low-energy, non-peaceful people because sticking around means tension and a lowering of our own energy. Moreover, we become a counterforce to what we're experiencing, meaning that we become angry at their anger and arrogant toward their arrogance. Practicing a peaceful approach to our life on earth is a way of returning to where we came from. At the same time, it's a powerful source of inspiration to all living creatures. Living passionately inspires others. Did you know that the word enthusiasm originated from the Greek language signifying the God within us? By definition, then, living our passion is the way to convey to others how to be in spirit. Being excited about life is infectious. It rubs off on others and is wonderfully inspiring. I'm reminded of a recent whale-watching trip I took where I observed a young woman I know named Beth as she spoke to a group of people about humpback whales. Her enthusiasm was palpable to the entire group aboard the boat, and the more passion she displayed, the more she seemed to inspire her audience. I've been aboard other boats and seen the impact of guides who merely go through the motions. People in this low-energy environment don't leave the experience feeling inspired. Beth, on the other hand, feels a passion that she conveys to others every single day during the whale mating season. Every day. You see, she studied marine biology in college and has always been fascinated by humpback whales and their amazing ability to travel between Alaska and Hawaii, to go 6 months without eating, to give birth in warm waters, and then navigate to cold waters on the return. For Beth, these whales are a part of God's mysterious, miraculous creation. She's living her passion, and she inspires others by her enthusiastic way of being. In fact, everyone in this vicinity knows that expeditions with Beth are almost a guarantee that you'll not only get to see the whales, but that they'll dance and breach and even swim under the boat for you. It's as if the whales themselves are inspired by Beth's excitement. When we're enthusiastically living our passion, whatever it may be, we transmit spiritual signals to those around us that we're in spirit, loving who we are, what we came here to be, and whoever comes into our field of vision. And finally, truth inspires others. Perhaps most urgently, we need to live and breathe truth because nothing inspires other people more than being in its energy field. Years ago, I wrote an article called Who Do You Trust?, in which I explained that the trust issue rests on who we seek out when we want truth. Are we drawn to those who will tell us what we want to hear, or those who are unafraid to be honest with us, even if it might be unpleasant or difficult for us to hear? The answer is obvious. We prefer to hear the truth. Honesty is a necessity if we're ever to live in harmony with spirit and become a source of inspiration for others as well. When we shade the truth, a part of our brain registers this incongruity. It shows up as a disconnect from God, and we're out of balance. Our body reacts by becoming weaker in the face of any falsehood, including our attachment to the false self known as the ego. As we practice living and speaking from our truth, without being hurtful or arrogant in any way, we reconnect with the energy we emanated from in the first place. So let's remember truth as a means for inspiring each other. We must be unafraid to live and speak our truth. Think how inspiring we'd all be for each other if honesty was a prominent feature of our interactions. By demonstrating 100% commitment to truth, with no exceptions, we send out a signal that we're in accord with our source and will do more to inspire others to live and breathe from their own truth than 1,000 readings of the Ten Commandments or any other written document. Truth and God are one. We don't have to preach it, only live it. By doing so, we'll radiate it to everyone we come into contact with. As an ancient Hindu saying reminds us, the name of God is truth. Chapter 12. Transcending Commonplace, Uninspiring Energy. Quote, "For all our insight, obstinate habits do not disappear until replaced by other habits. No amount of confession and no amount of explaining can make the crooked plant grow straight. It must be trained upon the trellis by the gardener's art." That was Carl Jung. And another quote from William Wordsworth, "Habits rule the unreflecting herd." Thanks to the world we live in, we've developed many habits that are the direct result of living almost exclusively in ego rather than in spirit. This chapter will stress how to gain awareness of these ego habits, how to immediately protect ourselves from these onslaughts, and how to develop alternate strategies to ensure that we remain connected to spirit, even in the face of a blitzkrieg that's designed to take us away from living an inspired life. I'm not suggesting that there's a conspiracy to keep us from living in spirit. My contention is simply that when a majority of society members are raised and persuaded to believe in the illusion of ego, then that society will develop and evolve firmly committed to that false self. It would then be natural for such a society to put forth messages designed to promote the idea of the importance of ego and all of its inherent ideas, and we're fully immersed in such a society right now. Ego's warriors. Let's take a look at some of the habits that rule the herd, in the words of William Wordsworth. Following are several omnipresent, lacking in inspiration entities that join up with ego to bombard us daily and that we need to become aware of. The media. A century or so ago, long before the media became such an active force in our lives, the news was almost exclusively received from one's village. Bad news was rare and tended to only involve accidents or natural disasters such as fire, flood, drought, or the occasional crime perpetrated by someone in the community. For the most part, one's daily life was consumed by work and family interaction. Any kind of news was essentially information about the village and was primarily communicated by word of mouth. Today, however, it's a very different picture. We've created a society that sends out specially trained people to scour the globe for depressing bulletins that are delivered to us wherever we are. The news is now available at home, at work, in our car, at the gym, on airplanes, standing in line at the bank, in the hospital, and on portable devices wherever we go. We're now able to directly tune in to the reports of those organizations who search for information designed to make us feel bad, that is, removed from spirit, which is all about feeling good or feeling God. We're constantly subjected to this army of bad news collectors who gather and disseminate low vibrational energy for our consumption. Keeping in mind that being inspired is about feeling good and returning to our source of love, it's imperative to become aware of what we're allowing into our consciousness. These bad news assemblers are on a mission to convince us of the inherent evil in the world. They can't possibly believe that we live in a friendly universe, and they seem determined to convince us that their illusion is the truth. The defense against a media blitz of uninspiring energies is to remind ourselves that we want to feel good, in the sense that good and God are synonymous. We can't feel bad enough to change any of the bad news we're exposed to, nor can we eliminate hatred in the world by feeling hateful. We can't do anything positive or loving by joining those who've elected to live in these energies or even those who broadcast it to us nonstop. However, by feeling good, that is, by feeling God, we have an opportunity to be a small force that can transcend and convert lower energies into spiritual ones. The world of advertising. Everywhere we turn, we're a target of someone wanting to sell us something. There are advertisements on buses, in the backseat of cabs, at the movies, on telephone poles, on our cell phones, After every click of our computers, on the radio and television for more than a third of the airtime, in more than 50% of magazine pages, in most cases anyway, while we're on hold on the telephone and even in restrooms, it's difficult to escape this assault on our senses and our spirit as well. Behind this huge blitz that's aimed at us during every waking moment of our lives is the idea that we need to purchase something in order to be fixed or to be complete. Madison Avenue just keeps telling us that we'll overcome our deficiencies and be happier and more fulfilled if we simply buy whatever it is they're selling. The essential message behind this juggernaut is that we need more in order to be happy. Coincidentally, the mantra of the ego is just that: more, more, more. What I'm suggesting is that we can be free from the push to convince us that we need more, while still being able to enjoy the material aspects of the world. In other words, we know that we don't need more, and at the same time, we're free to live happily and enjoy our world the way it is. I want this distinction to be clear because it's fun enjoying a new automobile, or well-made clothes, or dinner in a nice restaurant, an expensive piece of jewelry, or anything else that might be advertised, including this program. What we want to avoid is the inner belief that somehow our true essence is lacking if we don't get the things we're being encouraged to buy. We must also guard against allowing the stuff to define our worthiness, which is what advertisers are frequently attempting to convey. Entertainment. As we progress toward a more inspired life, we'll begin to notice that the activities we've called entertainment have actually been leading us away from being in spirit. Since everything that we allow into our life represents an energy that impacts us both physically and spiritually, it's imperative to raise our awareness level and defend against the habits that deter us from being in spirit. It's vital that we're conscious of the following big four, which are really low-level energies masquerading as entertainment and are obstacles to anyone's ultimate calling to inspiration. 1. Violence. On average, children in America see 12,000 simulated murders in their own home on commercial and cable television before their 14th birthday. And virtually all movies made to appeal to a younger audience have grim killings, explosions, and chase scenes built into the storyline, which seems to consist of guns, 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 and kill, kill, kill. The more gruesomely, the better. These decidedly uninspiring messages continually bombard all of us when we're supposedly experiencing uplifting entertainment, but we can do something about it. If enough of us decide that this is not going to be on our daily menu, then the manufacturers of this kind of recreational material would bring it all to a halt. For example, if more of us were aware of the content of the video games that our kids play, many of which simulate rape, torture, and even murder, we wouldn't permit them in our homes. Yet there are alternatives available to us. First on this list is screening our entertainment options for violence and making a commitment to choose only those pastimes that are free of any energy that doesn't match our desire to be in spirit or inspired. Our Creator creates out of love, kindness, and peace. So if we clear opposite energies out of our life, we'll almost immediately feel inspiration returning to our life. What follows is one of the most poignantly inspiring letters I've ever read, written by my dear friend Ram Dass to the parents of a young girl who'd been brutally murdered. Even in such horrific circumstances, Ram Dass was able to provide inspiration. I reproduced this moving letter with Ram Dass's permission in order to help you see how it's possible to transcend violence with inspiring spiritual energy. Dear Steve and Anita, Rachel finished her work on Earth and left the stage in a manner that leaves those of us left behind with a cry of agony in our heart as the fragile thread of our faith is dealt with so violently. Is anyone strong enough to stay conscious through such teachings as you are receiving? Probably very few. And even they would only have a whisper of equanimity and peace amidst the screaming trumpets of their rage, grief, horror, and desolation. I can't assuage your pain with any words, nor should I, for your pain is Rachel's legacy to you. Not that she or I would inflict such pain by choice, but there it is. And it must burn its purifying way to completion. For something in you dies when you bear the unbearable, and it is only in that dark night of the soul that you are prepared to see as God sees, and to love as God loves. Now is the time to let your grief find expression, no false strength. Now is the time to sit quietly and speak to Rachel, and thank her for being with you for these few years, and encourage her to go on with whatever her work is, knowing that you will grow in compassion and wisdom from this experience. In my heart, I know that you and she will meet again and again, and recognize the many ways in which you have known each other. And when you meet, you will know, in a flash, what now it is not given to you to know, why this had to be the way it was. Our rational minds can never understand what has happened, but our hearts, if we keep them open to God, will find their own intuitive way. Rachel came through you to do her work on earth, which includes her manner of death. Now her soul is free, and the love that you can share with her is invulnerable to the winds of changing time and space. In that deep love, include me. In love, Ram Dass. I can't imagine a more inspirational letter being written at such a time of such difficulty. Typical of my dear friend Ram Dass. 2. Hatred. Much of our entertainment dollar is spent watching malice, hatred, and hostility in some form. Now, in my opinion, there's far too much animosity in our world, so I have no desire to sit through a movie or listen to a song that repeatedly describes how one group hates another. Martin Luther King Jr., one of my personal heroes, said that the only way to convert a perceived enemy into a friend is by love. Since we know that hatred itself breeds more of the same, then being exposed to it, even when it's dressed up as entertainment, is something to be cognizant of when we choose a film, a television show, a sporting event, a play, or a book. Any hateful message is non-spiritual energy that we're exposing ourselves to, and the more we consciously allow, the more we'll be inclined to attract it into our own lives. The moral of all of this is that entertainment can be uplifting and edifying, or it can be demoralizing and debasing. So where do we want our energy to flow? And even more important, what kind of energy do we want our children to experience? We must be on guard against any entertainment that uses excessive profanity and seems to support hatred and disrespect in its narrative. I love this story that the Dalai Lama told in a documentary titled The Yogis of Tibet, who witnessed the carnage and decimation of the entire Tibetan culture by the Chinese, beginning with the Communist Revolution of Mao Zedong in 1949, related a story in which he stated several times, "I was in great danger." This was surprising since these yogis cared very little about their own safety. When the enlightened yogi was asked about his perceived danger, he responded, yes, I was in grave danger. That is, I was in danger of losing my compassion for the Chinese. This is not only a beautiful story, but it also helps us remember to be careful about accepting hatred as normal in our entertainment activities, for they can put us in the same kind of danger that the enlightened yogi recognized. And even more personally significant, enjoying hatred as entertainment can keep us from reconnecting to our spirit. 3. Fear. Our universe is created out of love, kindness, peace, and well-being. So when we're an energetic match to this awareness and refuse to live in fear, we'll attract the protection and guidance we desire. We can absolutely affirm that we won't attract anything that's harmful to us or to our loved ones. We can heighten our awareness that we're never alone, and we can have faith that whatever we need to experience is on its way, and God won't send us anything we're incapable of handling. We can also be aware that the word fear is an acronym for false evidence appearing real. That one phrase can help us remember that the ego is the false self, and identifying with it leads us to believe the false evidence. Even now, after reading all of this, some readers may continue to make fear real with thoughts such as, "He wouldn't be able to say these things if he knew all that I've been through." But in my heart, I know that this is a universe that's on purpose and supported by a creator who is good. I never doubt it, and not only do I refuse to live in fear, but I also refuse to attract to myself the vibrational, energetic equivalent of those fear-based thoughts. As an old German proverb proclaims, fear makes the wolf bigger than he is. And finally, 4, sarcasm. Just about every situation comedy on television has a familiar focus, dialogue that's dedicated to sarcastic, unflattering comments between the supposedly comedic characters. Put-downs are the very bread and butter of almost all primetime shows today, so in essence, we're asking to be amused by children being smart alecks toward their parents and siblings, mouthing off to each other with as many disparaging comments as possible. Oh yes, and these nasty rejoinders are followed by a laugh track to really drive home that we're being, quote, entertained, unquote. Sarcasm designed to inspire laughter sends a message to viewers that's anything but inspirational. Remember, our ultimate calling is always about being in harmony with our source of being. We're all here as the result of a creator who has great respect for all of his creations. Since no one is inferior in our Creator's eyes, no one deserves to be ridiculed for the purpose of gaining an artificial laugh, not in life or on television. When a comment is made in jest and there's a kind of clever banter taking place, that's comedy at its best. But when hostility and disrespect are uttered in almost every verbal exchange, with the express purpose to discredit and mock another person, that's a decidedly uninspiring signal being sent to the audience. Awareness and choice are ours to exercise. So if this tendency toward sarcasm has become a habit, we must begin exploring alternatives to this kind of entertainment and family interaction. You may recall that I wrote earlier in this book about my mother. Well, I simply cannot even imagine using her as the butt of a joke to demean or ridicule her. And yet I see this kind of disrespect taking place in nearly every episode of every situation comedy on the air today. Being courteous to others is a match-up to the energy of spirit. Having fun, telling jokes, and being playful with others are all part of being in spirit. But a hostile, sarcastic sense of humor is an energy that moves us away from spirit and into the realm of hurt and dishonor. On every radio, CD player, and television set, there's a wonderfully inspiring little button that says on and off, and it's your choice to befriend it. You can literally push it anytime you wish, or you can use an inner off button whenever you're bombarded by anyone or anything whose purpose is to distract you from your ultimate calling to inspiration. Don't be afraid to use the off button. It works. Chapter 13. Inspiration in Action. Quote, in our era, the road to holiness necessarily passes through the world of action. Dag Hammarskjöld. And quote, knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. When we feel inspired, we're on the road to holiness that Dag Hammarskjöld refers to. Yet that road can only be paved with actions that mirror the intention of our originating spirit, actions that we're capable of choosing consciously if we're aware of the duality of giving and receiving. Like two sides of the same coin, giving and receiving are inseparable. Other examples of our duality abound. Before we can take a breath, we must give a breath. In order to give anything away, we must first have been willing to receive it. And our ability to feed others is linked to being able to accept food ourselves. Who has ever seen a person with a front but no back? How about an inside without an outside? Or a magnet with a north pole but no south pole? So just as the prayer of St. Francis reminds us that it is in giving that we receive, in order to receive inspiration, we must be willing to give it away, and vice versa. I'd like to present some examples of my own deliberate efforts to put the duality of inspiration in action into practice. I work at this every single day of my life. Every human encounter represents a moment of truth for me, one in which I choose to be reconnected to spirit and offer to others what I genuinely want for myself. The opportunities present themselves in the form of a smile or a greeting or an extension of kindness, even if it's just a silent blessing to a person begging on a street corner, or a prayer said quietly to myself when I hear a siren. The siren is a reminder to me to offer my thoughts of comfort to whomever is in need of assistance. These are habits that I've developed over a lifetime. Then there are the days when I go out on a premeditated odyssey of inspiration without any fanfare or need for recognition. Here's the result of one such inspiration excursion, and keep in mind this all happened in one afternoon. I reside on West Maui while I'm writing, and on this particular day I decided to make the 20-mile trek to Costco to load up with supplies for 2 weeks of uninterrupted writing. As usual, someone was standing by the roadside looking for a lift to the other side. This is a commonplace occurrence here on Maui, and it's my regular practice to pick up whoever's seeking a ride, usually a young person with a surfboard or a couple with luggage needing transportation to the airport. I always view giving rides as an opportunity to serve another person, and I get to feel good as well. If you're thinking about how dangerous this practice might be, I simply don't ever entertain such thoughts, and I never attract people or events into my life that cause me harm. It's just not my way of being in the world. On this day, I picked up a 41-year-old man from Canada named Raven. Maui tends to attract people with names like that, who needed to get to the airport. As we talked, it turned out that my passenger hadn't spoken to his father in 17 years, distancing himself out of respect for his mother and sister, who had their own unresolved conflicts with this man. Raven admitted that he felt distressed and incomplete. Moreover, he found himself repeating some of the behavioral patterns of his father that had caused this family's rift in the first place. I brought up the subject of forgiveness, mentioning this quote from A Course in Miracles. Quote, "Certain it is that all distress does not appear to be but unforgiveness." Unquote. I related the story of my experience at my own father's grave in 1974 and how that one single act of forgiveness turned my life around and headed me back in the direction of spirit. As I dropped Raven off at the airport, he hugged me. With tears in his eyes, he said, "I can't believe how much this one trip has changed my life. I feel that you were sent here by God to remove this sword that's been hanging over my head. And I know what I have to do, and I will do it, and I'll do it soon." It was a moment of inspiration for both of us. It would have been just as easy for me to maintain silence on that 20-mile ride along the ocean, but I knew that on this day, I was on a pilgrimage of inspiration, and Raven was one of my co-conspirators. I headed back to Costco for one of my favorite activities. I love the opportunity to purchase large amounts of goodies of all descriptions in the store's open warehouse atmosphere among lots of local people doing the same thing. At the back of the store on this day, a gentleman who recognized me from my PBS appearances approached me and wanted an appointment to discuss a problem he was having. I informed him that I was writing a book, so a scheduled meeting would be impossible. But knowing that some force had brought us together in the midst of all this delightful chaos, I asked, "What's the problem?" The man told me that he was a diabetic who developed a fail-safe method for delivering insulin in a manner that would leave no one out. "So, what's the problem?" I once again asked. "Why not implement your plan?" He went on to explain how he'd been unable to get the necessary government agencies to meet with him. Various layers of bureaucracy were impeding his progress. On and on he went with a litany of obstacles that he felt were being placed before him, until I finally stopped him. "I sense that you know exactly what's needed since you're a diabetic too," I said, "and you know exactly what needs to be done to implement your idea." He lit up like a Christmas tree, giving me a knowing smile, and he said, "Exactly, but I can't." I stopped him cold, reminding him that when we focus on what we don't want, then that's what we'll get. We get what we think about, whether we want it or not. I then asked him to consider staying out of the system of obstacles altogether. He should go ahead with his plan, forget about what couldn't be done, and just do it without the assistance or resistance of anyone else. If your plan is viable, then they'll ultimately come along, I reminded him. Just do it and stop trying to get the approval of a bureaucracy. And then I asked, "You know what to do and how to do it, don't you?" "Yes, I do," he replied, "and I will. I feel as if this little meeting was arranged by God just for me today." After getting my second hug from a stranger in the past 30 minutes, the man pushed his shopping cart away with a newfound sense of inspiration. He'd returned to spirit, where the idea of anything being impossible is impossible, and I'd been able to extend some spirit offerings to another. Continuing on my way back to West Maui, I picked up a young fellow named Andy, who was on his way to the Hard Rock Cafe, fancying himself a Rastafarian rap artist. Andy had long dreadlocks and a strong inclination toward using marijuana as a stimulus for his music. As it turned out, he simply wanted to approach the manager at the Hard Rock to see if he could perform there on weekends. He was out of funds and without a plan. Even his upcoming spontaneous audition had been purely a fantasy, since he hadn't contacted anyone at the restaurant for an appointment. As we talked, I told him a story that my daughter Summer had recently related to me. She has a little dog named Joey that she takes with her every day as she trains horses and gives riding lessons. Her friend Mimi had told her that Joey was a perfect example of being at peace with God, and my daughter agreed. Joey's mantra is, "Breathe in, breathe out, life is good," she said. That's all Joey does all day, every day. Breathe in, breathe out, life is good. Andy loved this story, so I asked him to give me a song using this theme as the primary lyric. My car was suddenly filled with the sounds of a Rastafarian rapper pounding out a fast-paced lyric. It was sensational, and Andy was in heaven. By the time I dropped him off at the restaurant, he had his audition all planned, and he'd written his very first song. Breathe in, breathe out, life is good. I handed Andy a $50 bill, which inspired him to cry out in appreciation, and off I drove. It was a double dose of inspiration. Andy was aligned with spirit by being a creator of his own music and feeling purposeful and confident, and I was experiencing heaven on earth for being able to extend love and assistance to another person. and it was my third such gift in the past 2 hours. Next, I proceeded to a grocery store to pick up a few items in smaller quantities than were available at Costco. As I stood in the checkout line, I struck up a conversation with the woman behind me on the subject of raspberries. I was purchasing 2 half pints of these precious little jewels to put on my morning bowl of cereal, and the lady asked about the price, which I hadn't noticed. She went on and on about how much she loved raspberries, but their cost was so outrageous she'd never spend that kind of money, even for something she loved so much. I responded by telling her about my happy memories of growing up in Michigan and picking berries as a young boy. To this day, raspberries are one of my favorite foods, and I buy them whenever they're available. The woman could relate to my memories since she grew up in Pennsylvania and used to pick the berries herself, coming home with red stains on her fingers and all around her mouth. At the register, we saw that the baskets of berries came to $7.99 each. My new friend almost collapsed, but told me to savor each and every one of those little treasures. As I walked away, I reached into my bag and I placed one of the containers in her hands and told her to enjoy them as a gift from me. This lady, who was counting out her change to pay for a single container of yogurt, was stunned. I finally convinced her that if she wouldn't accept them as a gift from me, she'd be depriving me of my own treat and knowing how much pleasure she was going to have relishing and savoring these little gems. My new friend was obviously inspired by this unexpected expression of kindness to a stranger. I could see the gratitude and love in her eyes as she tucked the berries in her straw bag. I, of course, was right on track, enjoying my 4th occurrence of inspiration in action on the same afternoon, and much to my surprise, number 5 was evolving right in front of my eyes. In almost every aisle of the grocery store, I'd seen the same woman, dressed in flowery slacks and a bright orange blouse. As I approached the bakery to buy a loaf of olive bread for my daughter Serena's arrival the following day, she loves this bread, the woman in the colorful outfit talked to me about a multi-grain bread that she absolutely loved. "It's the best I've ever tasted," she said in a heavy foreign accent. As I approached the cashier, there she was again ahead of me, asking if I'd hold her place while she picked up some items she'd forgotten. Then in the parking lot, she stopped her car to allow me to enter the exit ramp. Finally, as I was driving home, I spotted her again. Her car was sitting by the side of a putting green with the door open and the engine running, and she and a man were hitting golf balls on the green. To me, this was more than a series of accidental encounters, so I decided to turn my car around and deliver a present to her. I pulled up behind the automobile and approached with an autographed copy of The Power of Intention in my hand. It turned out that this lady was originally from Poland and was on her honeymoon. She introduced me to her husband, and I gave them the surprise wedding present, for which they were most grateful. I have no idea what took place in their lives after I drove off. I can't tell you why she kept appearing over and over and over again, or if the book I gave them made any kind of a difference in their lives. All I can say for certain is that these newlyweds were very touched by my gesture, and I had my 5th gift of feeling connected to spirit in one afternoon. As you can see, the opportunities to reach into the lives of others in an inspiring way arise in countless ways every single day. We can either act on these momentary impulses and feel inspired, or we can ignore them and stay in our ego-dominated world. I choose to act, for it makes me feel creatively alive, connected to God, and to everyone else in the world. Taking action is how we increase our connectedness to spirit. If we're heeding our ultimate calling, we must be willing to act on that mission. We may believe that inspiration is something that arrives in some mysterious way that's beyond our control, or perhaps we're waiting for God to send us motivational signs. But it's clearly best to rely exclusively on our decision to act in ways that will intensify our awareness of spirit. Try this action plan for a few weeks and see if you don't feel more inspired than you've ever felt before.